The Cost of Doing Business. Kaiserl Bernard von Dalton 2. Day 18. Today was looking to be a very lovely day. After all, I had a special guest coming to my mansion. From the moment my cousin told me about Kasia Blanc, I saw value. She is a lone adamantite plate adventurer to start with. Any noble would spend a fortune to add her to their house retinue for just that pure strength. But that was only the start. She is the crown princess of a foreign land that is all alone without protection. The wealth and power one could acquire with her kingdom's fortune if they were to marry or use other more viable methods on her was delicious to think about. And then, there was the fact that she was immensely beautiful. All of this meant that if I could take her today, then 8 Fingers would own an entire kingdom. One that was unaware and ripe for the picking. After that night at the feast, I immediately had multiple agents find all the information they could on her. All of which was extremely promising and made what I planned today all the easier. She has lived in Rantel for almost half a month. She only has a few associates, one of which is her adventuring team, the Swords of Darkness, who are just a group of 4 measly silverplates without any connections, the sister of one of the members of the adventuring team, Turinina Veyron, and finally, Lizzie and Nfaya Bear, alchemists that could easily be cowed into submission. None of these 7 people had enough power or connections to be able to stir up too much of a fuss if she were to go missing. And, if needed, I could always send a few agents to deal with these people if they became too irritating. This all led to the current plan. It didn't take long to have a special drug brought in by some 8 Fingers agents on short notice along with magic-suppressing shackles. The moment I informed the others on how special an opportunity like this was, they rushed to meet my request. The drug, known as Dragon Snare, was a special concoction made to put dragons to sleep. For a regular human, it would probably kill them. But for an adamantite plate, they'd be knocked out for hours if not days. It helped that the drug was essentially untraceable, so she wouldn't notice anything after consuming any of the food or drink I planned to offer her. Once she was unconscious, we'd slap all the shackles onto her before giving her a good dose of Princess's Relief, a highly addictive drug that left users in a euphoric and agreeable state. Once the drug cleared from a person's body, said person would immediately begin entering withdrawal mixed with a state of dimmed cognizance. Usually, this dimmed cognizance could be broken once the user had fully exited their state of withdrawal, but long uses of Princess's Relief made this effect permanent. I found it quite amusing and appropriate for it to be this specific drug that was chosen for such a royal lady. After that, it'd likely take a few weeks to finally break her before we could begin the next stage of the plan. Due to her being alone, none from her home country, the absurdly named Realm of Foxes, would question if their princess came home wed to a noble from another land. Once there, we'd begin the 3rd phase of the plan. We'd bring in our agents to deal with Kasia's mother. And with her dead, 8 Fingers would now own an entire country with a puppet queen at the helm. I was quite excited about this plan since I would be said lucky noble who would be wed with the soon-to-be queen. I'm the one who came up with the plan, after all. Now, all that was required is a beautiful and simple-minded princess. I didn't need to wait long, much to my growing excitement, as my manservant arrived into my study, likely with a beautiful blonde in tow. "Greetings, my lord. I have come with your guest, Princess Kasia Blanc. Shall I bring her in?" Harold, my loyal servant, asked with a bow. I couldn't help but smile. "Of course. Bring Princess Kasia in at once. And following that, bring some of our good refreshments for our honored guest," I answered with a cheerful tone. It was best to give the princess no reason to be suspicious. Besides, I just needed her to consume anything and I would have her in our trap. A few moments later and Harold brought Kasia in. I watched with no small amount of pride that she looked around my study with an impressed gaze. I would admit that I had filled this study with quite a few relics of immense value. One of such, an object that the blonde princess was studying with interest, was the skull of a dragon that I had obtained through an underground auction in the capital of Riestais. In fact, quite a few items in my study had been obtained throughout multiple auctions that I had attended. This dragon skull is quite large. I'm very impressed that you managed to obtain such a fine and intact specimen, Kasha remarked before moving over to the plush chair cushioned in purple velvet across the table from me. That's a good eye you have there, Princess Kasha. In fact, many items within my study are quite rare and took years of time and money to acquire. I explained with a charming smile. For instance, the chair you are sitting on was part of a set that had originally belonged to one of the former emperors of the Baharuth Empire. Really? Kasha asked with interest as she examined the chair she sat upon. What a simple creature. It seems that even with her adventurer ranking and royal title, she was quite easy to impress with simple things. Of course. In addition, the table we're both sitting at once belonged to a former queen of the Riastais kingdom, Queen Arietta II. She would use this table in her sunroom when entertaining guests. It took quite a bit of effort to find and buy this after it had been lost during a fire in the palace. The original table had been extremely damaged and it took a few years to have this restored. Very fascinating. I take it that you have an interest in history, Count Izelk? In a manner of speaking, I do. I enjoy collecting unique and valuable things. It just so happens that a lot of what I collect has a grand history behind it. What of you? Do you also find such things to be of interest? I asked, genuinely curious. While I plan to capture this princess, I would be a liar to deny that I didn't enjoy when someone talked of historical matters or wished to know more about the history of all the objects I had in just this room. I knew the histories of each and every single piece that had been gathered here. Humorously, I think that I'd likely have enjoyed a profession as an archivist instead of a noble or a leader of the Eight Fingers. Unfortunately, it didn't bring the money or power that the two professions I had now did. So now, I'd have to live out such a fantasy through my collecting. History has always been an interesting thing to research, be it historical or mythological. For instance, there is the known history of quite a few gods back in Yggdrasil. Ah, yes, Kasha did speak of her homeland and how the deities there had closer interactions with mortals compared to the deities here. It would probably be a good idea to know more about them, just in case. I'd love to hear of it. Kasha gave me a warm smile, and I felt amusement at how little she understood her situation right now. She probably wouldn't be smiling soon enough, but by then, it really wouldn't matter. As Kasha crossed her legs, I couldn't help but think of how strange and provocative her odd clothing was. The skirt of her dress wasn't even a single piece. Instead, it cut up on both her sides and left a scandalous amount of her thigh and hip on display. Her simply crossing her legs was more like erotic teasing than a simple movement. Excellent! Kasha excitedly clapped. She really did seem simple-minded. To start with, one of the more powerful gods in Yggdrasil is the leader of the Aesir gods known as Odin, the Allfather. He was known for an immense wisdom that had been acquired when he traveled to the world tree and hung himself upside down for 9 days and nights on one of its branches. This gave him knowledge of the lands around him. Yet, to fully acquire the wisdom that came with this knowledge, he sacrificed one of his eyes to the world tree itself, giving him understanding of everything that had been shown to him. Interesting. And this Odin couldn't just use his divine power to restore his sight? I asked as Harold came in with a cup of tea for Kasha along with some scones filled with custard. He set the offered food before Kasha before bringing me my own cup of tea and scones. Thank you, Kasha said as she picked up her cup of tea and blew on the slightly steaming drink. Just a little bit more and she would seal her fate. She then lowered the cup from her mouth slightly, but I made sure to continue remaining calm as I sipped from my beverage. Then, she raised the cup and took a sniff of the drink with a smile. She shouldn't be able to smell the drug. The reason that dragon's snare was used against the creatures was due to how it couldn't be smelled. Obviously, she, as a human, wouldn't have the capability to smell what even dragons couldn't. This tea has such a remarkable scent. It wouldn't happen to have nutmeg and hazel ground into it, would it? She asked in appreciation. I smirked. Of course he hadn't known. It was just the ingredients that were normally used in my morning tea that she noticed. Why yes, Princess Kasha. You are very keen to notice. My servant, Harold, has been making this tea of mine for years. It's a mixture of nutmeg, hazel, and ginger splashed with a hint of peppermint. I have it every morning, I said while raising my cup and sipping from it. What a unique tea, she said as she raised it to her lips before pausing and lowering it infuriatingly from her mouth. Oh, pardon me, Countess Elk. You asked me a question about why Odin couldn't just regrow his lost eye, and I almost completely forgot about it. That's fine, Princess Kasha. As my father once told me, there are many things that can wait in life, but good tea is not one of them. I took another sip and watched Kasha slowly raise the cup back up to her lips once again before lowering it slightly once more. Just drink it already. I'll have to remember that saying for the future, she said with some amusement before she finally brought the tea to her lips and started sipping from her cup. Good. The drug should take less than 5 minutes to begin taking effect. Delicious. Hopefully, you'll understand why I love to have this beverage in the morning. It really helps to start off my day on a high note, I said with a small hint of satisfaction. Now, as I was saying, when Odin gave his eye to the world tree, it sealed a divine pact between the two. Odin would never again receive sight from his right eye in exchange for the knowledge provided. Yet, that doesn't mean he actually lost the eye entirely. Kasha took another sip from her cup before picking up a scone and taking a bite from the treat, taking her time to savor it. What ended up happening to Odin's eye? I would assume that it would be rendered useless after a pact like that. Kasha swallowed the scone before speaking. While Odin could never see from his sacrificed eye, that didn't mean that it was useless. The bodies and blood of gods still contain great power if one knows how to use them, and Odin, with the new knowledge he had acquired, was able to split the eye in two. From those two pieces he reforged them into a pair of great ravens, Hugin and Munin. These ravens would act as his eyes and ears across the land. Simply fascinating. And you mentioned a thing called a world tree. What is that, besides what one might infer from its name? I watched as Kasha finished her cup before requesting a refill, which Harold performed with utmost haste. Thank you, Kasha said before sipping some more from her cup. All this foolish woman did was speed up her fate. The subject of the world, the blonde princess, stopped for a moment before shaking her head, then she continued, sorry about that. As I was saying, the subject of the world tree is a bit of a mystery since not even the gods know where it came from, as it was older than even them. Surely, there must be theories? I asked, becoming more excited as Kasha's eyelids slowly began drooping until she shook herself awake. Some say that the world tree came about from a massive concentration of mana coalescing until it formed a seed. The teacup that Kasha had been nursing dropped from her hands to the floor and shattered. Thankfully, I had made sure to give her one of the cheap cups in expectation of this moment. Something is wrong. The princess stuttered out as her voice became weaker. She tried to stand from her chair, but she soon fell back down with heavy breathing from the attempt. Her eyes were straining to remain open, filled with fear. Why you, poisoned, she gasped. I took that moment to smile in victory. Getting out of my chair, I slowly stalked over to Kasha with all the intention to gloat. Not poisoned, Princess Kasha, just drugged. Her eyes widened with a questioning gaze. You might be wondering why I've done this to you. Well, the answer to that is due to your great importance to mine and my organization's goals. As I said this, I leaned over the chair my soon-to-be puppet sat in as she tried to futilely pull her face away from me. I felt an extreme amount of amusement and satisfaction from the power I held over this member of royalty. Her life was mine, and seeing those orange eyes look at me with fear made this all the sweeter. Don't worry, Princess Kasha. When all of this is over, you'll be the queen of your country after your mother suffers a tragic accident. And as your future king, I'll make sure to take good care of you. The princess didn't have long to contemplate her future role in life as she finally fell unconscious from the drug fully taking hold. Looking up, I gave a motion to Harold, who quickly began pulling out the magic suppressing shackles which had been hidden in plain view of my collection. The foolish girl had probably been looking at her own chains of bondage without thinking it anything more than a rare and historical item I had attained. With a smirk as I gazed back down onto the beautiful princess, I felt the urge take a peek at her form. As her future husband and king, it was my right after all. Yet, as I lowered my hand to her bosom, I suddenly found I couldn't move it. It felt like some invisible force was constricting on my wrist, and when I was about to call to Harold, I felt another invisible force wrap around my mouth, preventing me from alerting my servant as he came over with the shackles. Then, I looked back down to the princess to see her orange eyes were fully opened and she had a smirk of amusement. Her entire expression reminded me of a cat playing with its prey. When the sounds of chains hit the floor, I looked over to see that Harold was now being lifted into the air by an invisible force and being choked. His attempts to claw at his throat were stopped as his hands could seemingly only claw at the air, just out of reach as he continued gasping. All he could do was kick his legs helplessly in the air. No, the plan was foolproof. She drank the drugged tea and ate the food. How? You know, that was a lovely tea and scone. A little bit drugged for my taste, but no one is perfect. Like you, for instance. I've heard quite a bit about you from a friend of yours, Lubelina. As she said this, my eyes widened in horror. She knew who I was from the start. And somehow, she had found out all about me from Lubelina. But how could that be? I know for a fact that Lubelina would never reveal such information so lightly. And even if she were to do so, she should be dead. It was confirmed after the fire. That's when it hit me. Kasha was involved in burning down the Golden Queen. In addition, she must have captured Lubelina sometime before or during the fire, using it to hide the evidence. You probably had such a massive scheme in mind with me involved. Though, there are a few snags in your plan that you didn't account for. As Kasha remarked in a taunting tone, I saw a cup, along with a teapot of the drugged tea Harold had been using, start floating over to Kasha before the teapot poured out a new cup that floated into her hands. She raised the cup up to me in a mocking toast as she soon began drinking the drugged tea without issue. Did she have some magical item on her person that prevented poisoning? All this did was flaunt my failure before me. For one thing, your plan hinged on me succumbing to your drug. Problem is that I'm completely immune to all poisons and such due to my biology. Your second problem, you assumed that if I were to ever marry someone, that it would be scum like you. You just aren't lucky enough. She took another sip after this before laughing. When Kasha had calmed once more, she spoke. The final issue, you thought that you could kill my mother with a simple accident. Here's the thing, Kasha snapped her fingers and reality seemed to ripple around her until a myriad of gold limbs grew about her until growing into 9 furred tails as her head became crowned with golden furred ears. Looking down, I saw that the force from before, both crushing my wrist and wrapped around my mouth, were a pair of her tails. Looking over to Harold, who had stopped thrashing as his arms and legs hung limply from his body, his neck was wrapped in a tail as well. Looking to my loyal servant's face, I was able to see that his face had turned blue while his eyes, red from all the blood vessels that had burst, now slightly bulged out from their sockets. Harold was dead. This inhuman woman did it. This monster. Oh, gods. I was going to be next. When we had talked a few nights prior, I told you that the realm of foxes is protected by a guardian deity. Well, I may have also left out the part that this deity is also the queen of this land. Oh, no. There was never a chance that this plot could have worked. I had tried to abduct an actual goddess. And then, I stated that I'd have her goddess mother killed as well. My expression must have been obvious at this point as the goddess laughed and said, "Ah, I see that you're understanding exactly the kind of situation you've managed to land yourself in. Let me reassure you, even if you hadn't invited me to your little house of horrors, I would still eventually have come for you." I tried to ask a muffled, "Why?" She seemed to understand what I said and gave me a few tisk-tisk in response. I would think that even a leader of 8 fingers would be smart enough to know why a goddess might eventually come for him. But if you want a few more specifics on why I've decided to devote some of my time to breaking down your organization piece by piece, it's because your parasitic group enslaved one of my girls while the other had to suffer years alone without her sister, all the while wondering about the horrors she could be suffering. Her orange eyes had turned golden at this point and gazed at me with absolute disgust and hatred. The smile she wore while watching me made the image all the more terrifying. We had managed to piss off a goddess by enslaving a daughter of hers. Likely, she was a young demigoddess, as that was the only conceivable way I could see us ever capturing someone like that. Kasha had likely been searching for her for some time. Maybe there might be a way for me to possibly lessen whatever punishment she might inflict upon me. I tried to shout out a muffled plea to her. She seemed to allow this as her tail snake away from my mouth and instead chose to coil around my throat like a golden noose. Please. If it's your daughter you're after, I have enough connections to find her for you. I feverishly pitched to the goddess until she silenced me by squeezing down on my throat, making the act of breathing difficult, let alone speaking. That's just it. Both my daughters are safe and sound right now. Yet, there's one small problem, she said while squeezing her thumb and index finger together. Did you know, when I found her, she had just suffered another of the countless rapes forced upon her. 3 of her ribs and her pelvis had been cracked, most of her teeth were missing, her right eye had gone blind due to physical trauma, vaginal and anal trauma, and she'd been repeatedly starved and beaten. This is in addition to the countless venereal diseases she was ailed by. The teapot that one of her tails was holding ended up exploding when it was squeezed tightly in anger. Following that, I had to erase years of my daughter's life from her memory so that she didn't end up suffering from the physical and emotional scars she went through. Kasha took another sip from her cup as I heard the bones in the neck of Harold's corpse start cracking from the tail that was still strangling it. My daughters both should have had a happy childhood. They should have been able to play together, talk about relationships, have someone to ask how their day went, have someone to be able to hug whenever they were lonely or sad. Instead, one had to go through hell while the other was left alone in a world that couldn't give a shit about a peasant girl missing her family. The tail on my throat dragged me until I was a foot away from Kasha's face and those glowing golden eyes filled with wrath. Then, she put a finger to my forehead and I felt like a jagged shard of glass had been driven through my brain. Then, it stopped and Kasha lowered her hand. Here's the problem. You have already told your little club about your plans with me. I'm not about to let that happen, so we need to handle it, wouldn't you agree? I couldn't speak or nod my head to agree as her tail had a tight grip on me. Let's begin with the easy part. We shall enter the contract of Gish. Henceforth, until your death, you will follow and obey all my instructions with absolute loyalty and without hesitation. Do you agree? As she said this, the glow of a spell surrounded us and her tail loosened enough from my throat to allow me to speak. Agreeing to the terms of whatever this spell is would probably be my only way of surviving, since I had no other option otherwise. Yes. I choked out in a hoarse voice as I felt the magic take a hold of me. At that moment, I knew that I'd never be able to disobey or hurt this goddess before me. I was a slave now bound to her. Very good, she said mockingly, here's what I want you to do. Your friends will probably be wondering why I'm not your captive. You'll give them the most amazing reason of why the plan didn't work and a bullshit excuse of why your friends shouldn't go after me and my loved ones. Following this, you are going to do everything in your power to dismantle and break 8 fingers. With me so far. My body responded automatically without any of my will doing so. Yes. Came the emotionless answer from my voice. After 8 fingers is as dismantled as it can be, you are going to donate your family's entire fortune along with all of your earthly possessions to the poor and destitute. By the time you're done, the only item that you will own and wear will be a simple potato sack, Kasha continued without an ounce of sympathy. All I felt was pain from this order. Everything that I had built up and acquired throughout my life would be gone. I'd have a life, but I'd have absolutely nothing. You'll spend the next 9 years of your life living on the streets of Rantle, begging for scraps while giving any wealth you may acquire to those in need. I bet you'll have a better understanding of what those without go through every day while you lived in luxury. That would leave me as no better than a dog. At this point, death would be better. Then, upon finishing your 9 years of penance, you will spend the rest of your life as a traveling monk that will aid the poor, the destitute, the hungry in whatever method is possible, and, as added insurance so you don't try weaseling your way out of this justified punishment, you are not allowed to kill yourself directly or indirectly. As she commanded this, she let go of both myself and Harold's corpse before pushing me back and standing from her chair. Do you understand? Yes. I will obey. I immediately answered. Then get to work. Kasha snapped her fingers and the bestial ears and tails of hers disappeared, leaving her with the appearance of a human once more. Have fun with your new life, she said while walking out of my study. The click of her boots being the only ominous sound that still came from her. I felt empty by the end of this. Everything that I had worked towards and built was going to be destroyed by my own hands. And I would be forced to go through with this, unable to even kill myself to escape what my life would become. Yet, I didn't have long to contemplate this sad state of events because my body was already moving over to my desk to pull out some parchment and draft a few letters. I didn't even have the chance to remove Harold's corpse that was still laying on the floor. I had to complete my first order. Nina. Since Kasha had given me the Foxfire tome, I had been diligently working on it since yesterday. Sure, she had me switched to the rapid casting training after an hour of studying, but I decided to try and incorporate some of the techniques of the fire aspects into my Firebolt spell. For instance, one of these aspects was to speed up the casting time of the spell. Originally, when I learned Firebolt, I was taught that you needed to compress the mana used within the spell until it exploded outwards. An analogy for that would be like when Lucrute fires his bow. In order to do so, he pulls the bowstring back to gather energy behind the arrow until finally releasing the string, launching the arrow. Yet, with Kasha's technique, there was a much faster way. Vibrate the mana. Strangely, her explanation behind it involved referencing a thing that she referred to as atoms. Apparently, they were extremely tiny pieces of energy, as she tried to explain, that were always in a stable motion. She gave me an example with water, which was apparently made up of an impossibly large number of atoms. When the atoms were stable, they would remain as water. When these atoms slowed, the water would turn to ice. But when the atoms sped up their motion, the water would turn to steam. Using this concept, gathering mana for a fire spell was made faster and more cost-efficient mana-wise by creating a simple spell array of mana and then having the mana rapidly vibrate within until the spell formed and launched. In comparison, the gathering method took seconds longer and required mana to continually be added to the compression, resulting in some mana being lost in the process. Utilizing this method, I lowered the casting time of both Firebolt and Foxfire by 2 seconds while halving the mana costs. For a person unused to magic, they'd barely notice the difference and just assume that I was casting faster. But for a mage, it was revolutionary. Lowering the mana cost of not just these 2 spells, but all fire spells in addition to the time it took to cast them could change magical studies around the world. It could possibly allow for mages who were skilled enough to cast higher-tiered spells, but did not have the mana capacity to now cast these spells. I held a tome that could change the entire world if its knowledge was spread. Warfare would change immediately. If the Baharuth Empire, who already had a powerful battalion of mages, were given this tome, then they could likely burn through the Reastais within the year. Sure, they might not fully be able to utilize the main aspect of this tome, which was about building upon the knowledge of Foxfire that I already had. But the rest of this knowledge would be worth more than enough. I needed to make sure that this tome was protected, both to make sure that the knowledge wasn't abused, but also because this was Kasha's gift to me. That made it more valuable to me than all the treasures in the world. On the note of the other, Foxfire, spells, I followed Kasha's advice and didn't skip ahead to further spells in the tome. I had a feeling that later spells would likely build upon knowledge I gain with my understanding of the first spell. And speaking of, Foxfire Will-O-Wisp. I hadn't figured out the trick to it just yet. I'd likely figure it out in a few weeks, but I was currently a little stumped. What, Foxfire Will-O-Wisp, did is conjure 3 spheres of foxfire that would be animated like spirits by the caster's mana. From there, the orbs would float around the caster as a form of protection that could block attacks or be sent to chase after an enemy. I never thought that there was a spell that could give life to fire, but now I knew that it existed, and that excited me. This spell consisted of 3 main steps. First, you conjure the orbs of foxfire. Next, you allow the orbs to orbit around your body. Finally, you animate the spheres to give them independence. Unfortunately, I still hadn't fully mastered the orbiting step. While the conjuring step was as simple as conjuring 3 balls of foxfire, the latter steps were more difficult. Whenever I tried the orbiting step, the 3 spheres begin the orbit for a few moments before I lost my concentration and the spheres would fly off into a random direction or break apart. But maybe I might be thinking of this orbiting step in the wrong way. Perhaps I was trying to do too much at once and needed to take a step back. I think my problem is that I'm not used to this concentration aspect that the spell requires. To be honest, I've never had any experience with concentration spells before. They were usually much harder to learn because of the greater effort needed to both cast and maintain. While most viewed it as an obstacle, I saw it as a new challenge to improve myself. If I mastered this concentration spell, then I can apply that mastery to any future spells I would learn. So, I should start small with this concentration spell. Just try with a single sphere and work up from there. With that, I began the conjuring step, forming a single sphere of foxfire. Then, with as much control as I could muster, I willed the sphere to begin slowly orbiting me. I had to really clamp down my focus on the spell once the sphere left my range of vision. When it finally came back in sight, I felt a bit of relief that I managed to finish one orbit. The only issue was that I really started losing control once it went out of my sight. Combine that with how the amount of concentration I needed to maintain this spell was not viable in a combat setting told me that I had a long way to go. I think that I'll try to make it orbit with my eyes closed this time. That would likely help with the concentration issues I had when the sphere went out of my sight. I closed my eyes after making this decision and tried to imagine the sphere attached to a spinning wheel, with me as the axle. I can't see the fire, but I can feel it. Just let it slowly spin around me and caw. The cawing of a nearby crow made my attention slip for a moment and I felt the flame veer off behind me. Opening my eyes, I looked over my shoulder to see the ball of foxfire fly a few feet away before snuffing itself out. I sighed in disappointment before looking up at the crow in a nearby tree that was now preening its feathers. Stupid crow. At least I was making progress. Maybe I should ask Kasha for some help with my concentration. She'd likely know a lot considering how many spells she often casts at once without issue. There has to be a trick for it. Taking a moment's break, I looked over to where the others were currently training. Peter currently seemed to have the hardest time with his training since he was still covered in all that weight while swinging his sword in slow, practiced movements. The heavy breaths he took along with how he was sweating buckets showed exactly how strenuous on his body this was. With Diane, he had managed to grow a small copse of trees at this point. It wasn't a forest, but it was progress, especially because he was showing less signs of exhaustion from channeling such large amounts of mana. At least that was one good thing about Kasha's casting training, it allowed us to go beyond our casting limits to push our bodies. Spellcasting of any form tires the casters who perform it aside from just using up their mana. Having to form the casting arrays and distribute mana in moments to create the spell was mentally tiring. Adding on top of this, is that channeling large amounts of mana through one's body tends to stress it. The stronger one was as a caster, the less they would be affected. The only caster among us besides Kasha who seemed to be an outlier was Luke Root. Aside from having a root arrow limit of 5 now, since yesterday he'd managed to increase it after our delving attempt, he appeared to have no limit at all. After testing it out with Kasha cutting her mana font spell from him, Lucrute could still create and control those root arrows without issue. I know that it is magic, but in a way, it also seems like it isn't, since this root magic doesn't seem to use mana. And whatever those white roots of Lucrute are, they are immune to Dine's druidic magic. And watching Lucrute now, he seemed to be getting a lot better at controlling his roots, since they at least didn't explode his targets when he shot them. Other than that, the four of us have just spent the past few hours practicing our skills, since Kasha had to leave us for a bit to handle some business. Additionally, she didn't want any of us to try the dungeon until she got back. It was understandable, since the dungeon was pretty dangerous, even without her being there to help us. Then, she teleported away. Hopefully, she'll come back soon, since all of us were itching to enter that dungeon again. We'd gotten past the gas trap and made it past a few more crypt rooms until we fell to another pit trap. This time, I know that we'll get even farther than before. Kasha. I felt pretty good after dishing justice to that pig of a count. Izelk's memories left a bad taste in my mouth, especially because I had to know of everything his plan for me entailed. It gave me shudders just thinking his little fantasies. But I at least managed to get some salvageable information from his mind. It seems that he had quite a few fingers in the acquisition of stolen goods for 8 fingers due to being the manager for that department. That, and he knew where at least 2 of my next targets lived. That saved me a lot of time trying to scry out their locations otherwise. The 2 targets of interest were Hilda Signaeus, the leader of the little club's drug production and trade, and Anton Devlin, leader of the club's transportation and smuggling of goods. I had quite the fun set of options before me. I could go after the transportation of the shitty club first, but that came with a bit of a downside. Since I suspected that Anton was involved with every branch of 8 fingers, that meant his services going to shit would immediately alert the other departments of the club. Then, they'd know that someone is after them and scatter like roaches. Nah, I think that I'd be paying Hilda a little visit soon enough. A few drugs from their drug dealer going missing wouldn't disrupt the club as much as their driver would. That was when I got a message from my copy. That's odd. She normally wouldn't contact me unless it's important. Or amusing. What's happening? I asked while leaving the pig's mansion. It appears that there is a visitor at the Fox Palace. My copy answered. Fox Palace? That's what we're calling it now? I couldn't help but comment. This coming from Miss Tree of the Gods? She retorted, making me grumble. Still, I'm calling you over here because your visitor doesn't seem like someone with the average level of power for this world. That made me freeze in place. Was it another player? Why did they come to the palace? Were the others safe right now? Is there anyone else with the visitor that might be hiding? Do you happen to recognize them from Yggdrasil? I quickly asked. No one we'd recognize from Yggdrasil, boss. Guys wearing very distinct platinum-looking armor. I think this guy's a New Worlder. Additionally, neither I nor the Kitsune patrolling have found anyone hiding nearby. That's good. Well, not exactly good, but possibly not player level of worrying. Still, I needed to take this cautiously. Has this person shown any signs of hostility? That or given any reason for why he's there? Guy's been pretty calm so far, considering that he's surrounded by over 50 Kitsune between levels 30 to 70. I also have a few preparations on standby in case he tries anything. Shit, I needed to deal with this. Unfortunately, looking down at my normal gear, I didn't think that going to meet this guy as Kasha the Adventurer would be a good idea. Goddamn clone really was forcing me to wear this. Quickly teleporting into the bedroom I had last used at the Fox Palace, I then rapidly re-equipped my clothes to the goddess stripper outfit that had been left in my inventory. Looking down, I hated how much of a fetish parody my copy had made of my normal dress, especially because it felt so damn breezy right now. That and this veil covering the lower half of my face was annoying to both breathe and smell through. At least the hat looked cool. Then, I dispelled my illusion and changed my eyes to a glowing golden. I found it a little strange how easily it was to change my eye color to gold at this point. Before, It occurred without my input by my instinctual side, especially when I was being worshipped by the magic nerds. Now, it was getting scarily easy to do so. Focusing back to the task at hand, I scried the area to find my visitor in platinum-looking armor standing calmly as a veritable army of kitsune encircled him, poised to attack at the slightest sign of hostility. My copy was lightly disguised as a normal kitsune amongst the bunch, just waiting. The man's armor looked extremely heavy and well-plated since not an inch of his body was visible. The only things breaking up the pure metal look of the armor was white fur that surrounded his arms from pit to shoulder before dropping off behind his armor, and a long tassel of white fabric that came from the top of his helmet. The only thing disrupting this image of a perfect knight was the hole punctured in the right dragon-headed pauldron of the armor. Floating around this man were 4 weapons: a hammer, a greatsword, a spear, and a katana. The katana ended up throwing me off since it didn't match the weaponry that I know is used by this country. Where did he get that? With a sigh, I couldn't delay this meeting any further than I already was. I really hoped that I'd be taken seriously by this guy. Then, I teleported to the entrance of the palace and used my tails to push the doors open with ease. Might as well make an entrance for this guy since I was supposed to be the goddess known as the Fox Princess. Then, I copied the way my copy had changed her voice with some illusion magic. I see that I have a visitor. I hope you aren't bothered by my subjects. They can be a little overprotective of me, I said while making my way down the palace steps. Not to worry. I can appreciate strong loyalty in a leader's followers. Besides, I find a situation such as this to be a new experience in my life. I can't claim to have ever been surrounded by an army of foxes before. The man answered with some humor. Though, my ears picked up on a very peculiar aspect about this armor that became known as he spoke. My nose helped to confirm it. His voice echoed in his armor. It might be a little muffled from interior padding, but the way his voice managed to echo from his helmet to his greaves told me that this armor is hollow. The lack of a scent besides the musty smell of the armor's interior helped to aid this deduction. Now, was this man a sentient suit of armor or was it being puppeteered by some magician outside of detection range? I'm happy to hear it. Though, I do wonder what might bring a person so well armored and powerful into a little lake like this. One might assume that you were preparing for a fight. I asked while leaving that remark open for my guest. If we'll be honest with each other, I came here because of what I've seen and heard about you. I wanted to get a good picture of it for myself. The Platinum Man answered. I hope that all the tales you've heard about me are good, I joked as a few of the 7-tailed kitsune subtly began forming around me as bodyguards. From what I hear, you are a benevolent goddess of magic able to conjure miraculous feats of magic beyond mortal ability. Others claim you to merely be a beautiful witch that claims divinity. I haven't fully made up my mind just yet. Platinum Man replied with ease. And what's preventing you from making up your mind? I think we both know that I'm more than just a simple witch, I said with amusement while keeping my eyes on the 4 weapons floating around the man. It helped that I could increase the glowing of my eyes to make it difficult to tell what I was staring at. I am well aware of that. I could even believe your claim of divinity. My indecision stems on whether you actually are benevolent or not. I have dealt with evil gods before. What truly makes you different? Recalling the history I had been told about this world, there have been a few instances of beings that appeared before the people of different kingdoms and such that called themselves gods. An entire country south of us had become zealots because of it. Yet, aside from those benevolent gods of the slain theocracy, there were also the evil deities that had to be defeated by the 13 heroes. Why did they have to give these famous historical groups the most boring names in this world? Now, isn't that just a tough question to ask me? I could claim that I'm truly benevolent, but you'd likely still not believe me. I could go on about all the good that I've been doing, yet those could be written off as lies to appease you. I could even try showing you, but that might just be waved off as me hiding a long-scale evil plan of mine. So, how exactly am I supposed to answer your question? I said, listing off every possibility that might be going through this man's mind. What I didn't expect was for the man to begin laughing until he eventually spoke. At least you are self-aware enough to realize this. Yet, that still leaves us at a standstill. I don't know your intentions or who you might be. To answer your first question, what I want is to make this place better than the one I left. This world has many different problems that I'd like to fix. I replied. And what if these people don't want your help? What would you do then? Platinum Man asked in rebuttal. Evil triumphs when good men do nothing. Don't tell me that you've lived with your head in the sands over current events. Look around you, at this kingdom, a place where a criminal organization rampantly gets away with injustice because multiple nobles are bribed to let them if they aren't already working for them. Look at the continual wars between this kingdom and the Baharuth. Boys and men on both sides are sent into a grinding slaughter by leaders who couldn't care less about their deaths, only their continual status quo. Look south, where a country of religious fanatics is forced to defend their borders from continual invasion and outright annihilation, all the while butchering or enslaving any non-human just trying to live a peaceful existence but found themselves unlucky enough to be stuck inside their borders. That's just 3 countries. None of the leaders of those 3 countries likely has any urge to change this, but I do. So, tell me, Platinum Warrior, what injustice have you bothered to lift your silvery ass up to stop? I finished, more emotional than I thought I'd be. The Platinum Warrior remained silent for a few moments, likely contemplating what I said. Then, he spoke once again. I will admit, my last overt act of stopping injustice was when I helped slay the evil deities centuries ago. Since then, I've spent my time in preparation. Preparation for what? Preparation for when more like the evil deities might come. I watched as countless thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, were slaughtered by beings who laughed and reveled in the chaos and misery they created. I have ignored lesser issues in favor of the greater ones I know will arrive. That's when I figured out who this guy was. You were one of the 13 heroes that fought the evil deities, I stated. The Platinum Warrior nodded. I once was part of the 13 heroes until we split apart after our task was completed. They went on to live out their lives. I continued preparing for what the future would bring. Then, why are you here? To talk to me or to kill me? As I said that, multiple kitsune around the man began growling in warning at him. I simply came to talk. I wished to gain some understanding of who you are. I made a gamble on the rumors that you are a benevolent goddess, otherwise I wouldn't have even bothered coming near. He answered completely relaxed, or what he was trying to make me think was relaxed. And from what you've heard me say, what are your opinions about it? I'd be lying if I said that there weren't terrible issues plaguing this world. I've watched kingdoms rise and fall, wars be fought over scraps that would disappear within a decade, allied nations turn on each other within the century after the newer generations forgot why they even came together in the first place. People like you and I are bound to watch those with short lives forget the lessons of the past and repeat the mistakes of history. Immortality. I couldn't help but become aware of it in this moment. Likely, because of my race as a demigoddess, I'd probably never die of old age or disease. Then, I made the horrifying realization of my racial passive time immunity. I really was never going to age. I would watch as Peter, Dine, Tyre, Nina, and Lucrute grew old while I would still look like I'm in my 20s. I would watch Nina and Tyre change from being teenagers full of life to old women on their deathbeds. Lucrute would give me his last flattering compliment before I didn't hear them anymore. I'm actually scared thinking about it. For a goddess, you're quite young, aren't you? That brought me out of my morbid contemplation and made me focus on the Platinum Warrior once more. Why do you say that? I asked. I've seen enough old eyes to know that you don't have them, no matter how brightly you make them glow. It's easy enough to tell that you're already contemplating your long life and who you'll watch age away. It's all over your face. He answered with complete certainty. I couldn't continue. I would hazard a guess that you've already grown attached to a few mortals from the way that you're acting. I didn't even bother responding at that point. I think I've seen enough for now. That pulled me out of my slump. What? Why? Because, you've told me everything I needed to hear. As he said this, he began walking away from me. I'd possibly like to meet with you again in the coming future. Hopefully, you'll be amiable to that. I don't even know your name, I said. Walk farther and farther from me. The kitsune that had encircled him split away and gave him a path to leave. Call me Riku Agania. The man said before. Surprisingly, he teleported away from view. My mind quickly analyzed what he did before coming to the conclusion of wild magic, world teleportation. Wild magic, what the hell was? And then my supernatural insight filled the gaps and I became absolutely disgusted. Wild magic is one of the 3 magics utilized in this world alongside runic magic and tiered magic. What made it disgusting to me, and caused me to question why someone claiming to be a hero was using it, is because it used souls to power it. It pulled from the souls of the dead of this world like a vacuum, put them through the magical equivalent of a blender, and spat out the remains as a spell. And what made such a magic horrifying is that it was finite in a way. If there were too many wild magic users, then the gathered collective of souls in this world would be sucked away into nothing, making said magic useless. The only way to fix that was to have a constant amount of people dying to refill that collective. That also meant that any afterlife in this world was absolutely fucked. I needed to think after all of this. Thanks for your protection, everyone. You can return back to your duties, I said to the still-gathered kitsune that were waiting for orders. They all bowed before giving a collective answer of, yes, princess. Then they went off into different directions. Some towards the bridge, others back inside the palace until eventually, the only ones remaining in the courtyard was me and a small golden kitsune that quickly dropped the illusion and turned back into my copy. I just sat down on the stairs and considered more of my potentially very long life ahead of me. But my copy eventually joined me and took a seat next to me. You okay, boss? She asked. I don't know. Since coming here, I haven't really thought much about my future, mostly just about everything happening in the present. Eventually, the others are going to die. And I'll still be right here. I'm afraid of that. I answered truthfully. My eyes were beginning to burn at the thought. But, boss, why not use some of your spells and such to try making them immortal? That would solve your entire dilemma. She suggested, something that I had already thought about but couldn't fully rely on for one simple reason. What if they don't want to be immortal? I questioned back as I felt a few tears start dripping from my eyes. Oh. Wiping my tears away with my sleeve, I took deep breaths in, slow breaths out. No matter what happens, I just need to enjoy the time we all have together. I tried to say positively, we've all got 60 to 80 years of time together. That's a long time. It's gonna feel like forever. And then I broke down weeping. Platinum Dragon Lord. Looking at my piloted suit of armor resting in the corner of my home, I thought about the meeting I had with that young goddess. That player? I couldn't trust her, not fully considering that I didn't have a complete grasp of who she was. But, from what I could see already, she was already building her power base up in this world. The mountainous stone tree along with the palace of solid gold guarded by an enormous multitude of those foxes which I had no doubt were powerful despite their size. But I did have some hope that it would be easy enough to reason with her. The fact that she had reacted so strongly to the mention of her immortality told me quite a few things. For instance, she is basically a child in comparison to me. A young goddess who hadn't considered the ramifications of what having an extraordinarily long life would mean for any relationship that she would develop with regular mortal beings. Additionally, the fact that she had made any connections to mortal beings at all while caring about their deaths meant that she had a working source of empathy and care for those weaker than her. That at least meant she could be convinced to aid the people of this world was something monstrous to come along. Something like another player. Looking at the hole in the pauldron of my armor, I was brought to the moment where I piloted my armor against the vampire. That thing was obviously a player, it was too strong to be anything else. Though, it appeared that the vampire had been put under a powerful spell of mind control, as initially, She didn't react at all when I had approached, only when I attacked. Unfortunately, my attacks weren't powerful enough to kill her while her guard was down. My armor's damage was a testament to that. So, I was forced to use my world teleportation to escape from the player before it could further damage my armor with that spear of hers. I have no idea how many other players managed to arrive in this world, but I may need allies, and having another player to aid in taking down one of their own was quite valuable. The former leader of the 13 heroes was truth to that. It was unfortunate how he had died and chose to remain dead from guilt. He was an honorable warrior who earned my trust and respect. I only wish that he could have seen all of us heroes complete our mission, yet, ruminating on the past did nothing to aid the situation now. I couldn't tell how many other players could be running around at the moment. Especially, since checking on the spot where that mind-controlled player had been revealed absolute devastation from a massive battle. Another player may have come to kill the vampire player for more power. From what I've seen previously, players had fought amongst themselves in a weird form of cannibalization to acquire the power of the other player, both strengthening the victor while weakening the loser. It could also be the very same fox princess as the player called herself who had killed the vampire player. Unfortunately, I was unable to find out since I didn't feel it was wise to prod too much into her. Players can be fickle beings, after all. While it is my duty to kill these players that were brought to this world due to my father's mistake, I felt pity for them. Perhaps in their original world, they might not have been monsters. But their arrival and actions in this world didn't stay my hand from what I needed to do. This was a dreadful business, and one day I hoped that this world wouldn't have to continue to suffer because of my father. Sadly, it was not this day. Kasha. Arriving to the training grounds of my team in my regular disguised appearance, I spotted all of them still hard at work on their training. I had been gone a lot longer than I had expected, so I hoped they hadn't missed me too much. With a smile, I made my way over to Nina, whose face was buried deep in her tome. At the same time, a sphere of foxfire slowly orbited around her until Nina's concentration broke and the sphere went flying off into the air before sputtering out. I was doing so well. My apprentice/daughter complained at the sudden failure. I can see that. Seems like you are building your skill at the spell up until you're able to maintain 3 spheres of foxfire. I commented from behind her, causing Nina to jump before turning around to see me. Kasha, did you really have to scare me like that? Nina complained. I widened my smile and leaned down a little before mussing up her hair slightly. Of course I do, kiddo. Gotta keep you on your toes. Besides, you're so adorable when you jump like that, I teased her before pulling her into a hug. Nina managed to pull her head up from my chest and met my gaze with a questioning look. Are you okay, Kasha? You seem a little off. She asked with concern. Seems Nina was becoming a real perceptive kid around me. I shook my head to reassure her. She didn't need to worry about me. It's the adult's job to worry about the kid, even if she thinks otherwise. I'm perfectly fine, kiddo. I've got everything that I want right here. I answered her warmly. Eventually, we broke apart and I called the others over. The other 3 were all surprised to see that I had returned. Hello, my beautiful fox. When did you get back? Lucrute asked as he made it over to Nina and I first. Just a few minutes ago. Took care of some silly things. Then arrived back here and terrified Nina. I replied before kissing him. When we broke apart, Lucrute raised a questioning brow. Not that I'm against the affection, but any reason in particular right now? I just felt like it. I answered. I didn't say anything about the existential crisis I just had earlier, which made me want to enjoy every moment I have with my loved ones. Peter and Dine arrived soon after, well, more so Dine since Peter was slightly lagging behind due to still wearing over 100 pounds of weight on his body. I was fairly impressed that he was able to move over here so quickly considering how tired he looked. I see you finally returned. Did you take care of whatever business it was that you had in Erantal? Peter asked with a few huffs as he rested his hands on his knees. Yeah. Just dealt with a guy who proposed some absurd little business venture to me that would have never worked. I had to turn him down, but I gave him some good advice which I believe he'll appreciate in the future. I answered with a giggle. Good to hear that. Dine remarked, at least you have more sense with money than a few of us here, he teased while glancing over to Lucrute. Hey, what are you looking at me for? Lucrute fired back. The amount of money I've won off of you over the years for many of the bets you've made could probably have afforded me at Dalton War Horse. Dine answered with a laugh. Lucrute rolled his eyes but gave a good-natured grin. Yeah, well, it just means that the times I win against you are all the more special. My silly archer said confidently. Tell that to the money in my purse. We all began laughing at that. After a while, we managed to settle down and I spoke to everyone. Seems like all of you have been working hard, but I'll assume that you're all getting a little bored right now. So, I think that it's a great time to make another attempt on the dungeon, I said, getting my team excited. Finally/yes, they said together, making me smile at the moment even more. They call it a Baja Blast. The Broken Child. Day 19. 5 days. 5 days ago, I lived in my village of Elwold. I had a home where I lived with Grandpa Ezra, Mom, and my little sister Aletta. We lived a simple life in Elwold. Elwold was a simple village of farmers and crafters. Our village was located by the edge of the great forest of Tob where we'd harvest lumber to make bowls, plates, tableware, and toys. Our farms grew our grains and potatoes. Every harvest season, we'd bring our harvest and crafts to the city of Arkland to be traded for money or items we needed. And afterwards, the village would have a day of celebration and festivities for another good year. We had it 6 days ago. 6 days ago, I had been drinking from a shared skin of silverberry wine with my friends. Keys had managed to sneak it out from his father's storage and he, our friend August, and I had it together. We spent that night laughing, talking about fun memories, local gossip, girls we fancied. We spoke of the time we managed to convince old Henrik that his stable was haunted for a month until we were found out. The beating we got for that was well worth all the laughter we shared. Part of the time was spent talking about the future. Keys had planned to continue farming since he felt the most fulfillment in his life by doing that. August said that he wanted to explore the world outside of our village, and planned to become a traveling trader because of it. I shared his same opinion. I dreamt of seeing more than this simple village we lived in. I gazed at the mountains miles from us and wondered what the other side of it looked like. I wanted to become an adventurer like Grandpa Ezra once was. He would sit me and Aletta on his knees when we were younger and told us of the days when he was a platinum plate. How he'd slain monsters, protected nobles, explored hidden dungeons filled with wealth and danger. And then, he'd tell us how he eventually came back to this village one day and settled down with Grandma Irenia after saving her from slavers. I had all these dreams and hopes with my friends. We went home that night, addled and happy. And then, I couldn't help but grit my teeth as my eyes burned thinking about it. Everyone should have woken up the next morning happy from the night prior. At worst, everyone who ended up drinking too much would have been hungover. Instead, I woke to screaming as our village was attacked. My head was pounding, but the moment I heard Mom and Aletta scream, I jumped out of bed and rushed to the main room where the wall had been caved in by something bursting through it. Then, I heard a noise that I would never be able to forget. Looking to the other side of the room, I found Mom choking on the floor drenched in her own blood. I ran over to her and tried to do anything I could think of to help her. Mom's throat had been slashed open along with a massive gash starting at her shoulder and going across her chest. It was like something had sliced its claws through her. I tried to stem the bleeding by ripping my shirt apart and holding the pieces against her wounds. I could still feel the warmth of her blood as it drenched my hands. Mom, it's going to be fine. We'll get you help. You'll be okay. I remember saying frantically, trying to reassure myself as well as her that she could still be saved. Yet, even dying there, she looked so calm as she put her bloodied hand against my cheek and gurgled out the words, "Run, Nero." I saw the life fade from her eyes as her hand fell to her side. Then I heard my sister scream. That made me look around to the hole in our wall before I ran outside. What I saw shook me to the core. Houses were on fire with my friends and neighbors running, screaming, or fighting beasts from the darkest hells imaginable. I heard another scream from my sister that was cut short. When my gaze turned to look, I found two monsters that looked like red-skinned infants with wings like bats, horns that curled back on their heads, and long, thin tails tipped with stingers that were repeatedly stabbing my sister. These horrific demons were cackling the entire time like it was a fun game, and looking at my sister, I could tell that she was still alive. Her eyes flitted about in horror, but her body couldn't move, she couldn't scream even as these creatures continued jabbing their barbed stingers into her. Our eyes met, and I felt paralyzed. She looked at me with absolute terror as her eyes pleaded for me to help her. Yet, I still couldn't move, even as these demons finally noticed me and gave me fanged grins. Their yellow eyes gazed at me with excitement as they began moving towards me, yet I still couldn't move. My eyes were still locked with the letters. The demons were about to pounce on me before Grandpa Ezra appeared between me and them with a blood-stained sword in hand. He quickly began fighting the two demons and was doing well to hold his own, but as time went on, he was slowing down. He managed to decapitate one of the demons before the other finally jabbed its stinger into his side. Yet, Grandpa grabbed that stinger and held onto it as he wrapped his leg around the demon's tail, dragging it closer before trapping it in place. Then, Grandpa began stabbing it over and over until he was covered in gore before letting go of the demon's body and falling to his knees. I was finally brought out of my paralysis and went to go help Grandpa until he held his hand out to stop me before tossing his blood-soaked blade to my feet. "Take it and flee to the trees, Nero," he commanded as I picked up the blade, the handle still warm from Grandpa's grip. But I tried to argue before he interrupted me with anger. "Go, you stupid boy. It's over for us. You have a chance," he shouted to me. I looked down at the heavy blade in my hands, then at the eyes of Grandpa and my sister. And I made the absolutely shameful choice, even with the eyes of my little sister begging for help. I ran. I ran without stopping through the trees, crying like a cowardly failure. I ran until I couldn't hear the screams of everyone I once knew echoing behind me. I ran for what felt like hours, praying to any gods out there to help me. I still ran, even as my legs and lungs burned while my body demanded I stop. I would have continued if not for my foot getting caught on the root of a tree, causing me to fall on my face. I was only lucky that Grandpa's sword hadn't ended up impaling me by accident. But at that point, my body couldn't go on. I felt myself curl into a ball and start sobbing. I remained like this until I eventually passed out, still covered in Mom's blood like some morbid final embrace from her. The worst part of that first day was the dream I had. I had awoken back in my bed at home. I ran out of my room and found Mom, a letter, and Grandpa Ezra at our table waiting for me to come join them. When I finally had, Mom set breakfast out for us and we all ate, chatting about the celebration last night. Then, Mom said, "I love you, Nero." I woke up to find myself still on the forest floor, realizing that everything I just saw was a dream. Mom was dead, while Grandpa and a letter had gods know what being done to them. I was still a cowardly failure who abandoned his family to suffer. I spent another few hours like this until I finally pushed myself to go on, even if all I wanted to do was curl up into a ball and die. Getting up, I started walking forwards, not knowing where I was even going at this point. We were all told stories about this place. How it was one of the dark, unexplored places of the world that few dared to fully tread. That there were monsters that hid in here, ready to eat anyone unlucky enough to cross their path. That first day, I walked through the forest absolutely terrified. Any little noise by plant or animal made me jump, thinking it might be a monster coming to devour me or those demons that would torture me. That first night, I climbed a sturdy tree and hid in the canopy, Grandpa's sword hugged against my body like a shield from the unknown terrors around me. I prayed to any deity to keep me safe. At least one might be kind enough to listen to me. That night, I dreamt of my family at the table again, except that all three of them were covered in blood. Then, I woke up. The second day, I couldn't ignore the hunger and thirst my body felt. My only lifeline in all of this were the techniques that Grandpa showed me which helped him to survive as an adventurer. The first was that you always needed water. A person can go without food for a long time, but they'll die if they can't get water within 3 days or so. Acquiring water in a forest can be difficult if you don't know what to look for. But there were a few ways to acquire water that were easy enough. Making sure that the forest floor was clear, I slowly made my way down the tree until my bare feet touched the ground. Then, I began walking around until I found a patch of leaves and grass that morning dew on them. Reaching down, I yanked the leaves and grass from the ground before sucking all the dew off of them. Then, I cast the plants aside and repeated the process a few more times until my thirst was slightly sated. Following that, I scavenged for any of the plants Grandpa had shown me which were edible. It took a great deal of time, but I found a bush of berries and thought that I might finally be able to eat. At least, until I got a closer look at the berries and identified them as highly poisonous. So, I continued searching until I was finally rewarded for my efforts as I found a bush of mapleberries. They were a sweet fruit that was mostly known for being used in meads or wine. I started ripping berries off the bush and quickly scarfed them down to quiet my growling stomach. Once I felt full, I took off the bloodied remains of my shirt and used it as a makeshift sack that I filled with as many mapleberries as it could hold. When I couldn't put any more in, I tied the makeshift sack up and attached it to my belt. With my food secured, I continued my journey once more and started walking in any direction that was away from my former home. I didn't encounter any issues throughout this day until night fell. That was when I heard a howling. Wolves. Looking around, I found a sturdy tree and rushed for it, hearing the sounds of multiple limbs sprinting across the ground from behind me. My pace increased as I reached the tree and started climbing. Behind me, I heard a growl and pulled myself up just in time to avoid a pair of ravenous jaws snapping at where my foot once was. I kept climbing until I reached a high enough tree limb that made me comfortable enough to look down. Those weren't wolves. They were wargs. The large creatures were covered in brown fur with eyes as red as blood. From what Grandpa had said, they were larger and more dangerous than regular wolves. Smarter, too. I watched as the wargs tried jumping up the tree using their claws as support. They could only make it a few feet before losing their grip and falling back to the ground. When they realized that they weren't going to get me, the pack of 6 wargs began to just circle the tree, trying to wait me out. Damn it. I escaped from demons only to get torn apart by fucking dogs. I hate this. I hate being alone. I just want my family. Please, any of the gods out there, I need help. I don't know what to do. Rest. I began looking around when I thought I heard a woman's voice. Realizing that I was probably hearing things, desperate for anything to talk to, I slumped back and went to sleep with tears in my eyes, desperately wishing my family was here. That night, I dreamt of a hill covered in silver grass with an ever-changing sky of gold. When I woke up the next morning, I looked down the tree to find that all the wargs were now missing. Popping a few mapleberries in my mouth, I cautiously made my way down the tree until my feet touched the ground. Looking around, my heart pounded in anticipation that a warg might come bounding out from some hiding place and eat me. I held Grandpa's sword in front of me, waiting for something to happen. When nothing did, I crept away from my former hiding place and continued looking around for a warg to appear. Where am I even going at this point? The further I keep going into this place, the worse it would likely get. Go west. A woman's voice told me, making me swing around to try and locate the voice's owner. My shoulders slumped as I realized that I was probably going crazy from paranoia and stress. But maybe I should just continue going west. As long as it's away from home. Looking up through the canopy of leaves, the rays of sunlight that shined through told me that I was already traveling west. I just had to keep walking and find where it took me. That day, I cautiously walked between the trees while scouting out any sources of water. Unfortunately, I didn't find any plants covered with dew, so I went thirsty for that day. While walking, I couldn't help but wonder why. Why did demons attack my village? Why slaughter or torture everyone? What could we have done to have justified such horrors to be brought upon all of us? Thinking about it just made me more frustrated and angrier. We all just lived our lives doing nothing wrong. Yet, my home was destroyed. And those demons, they just laughed about it. They just laughed as they tortured Aletta. Looking at the sword in my hand, my grip tightened as I thought about what I was going to do. I'm going to get stronger, and then I'm going to kill every last fucking demon. I'll chop them up. Rip them to pieces. Tear them apart so that they'll never hurt anyone ever again. And if Aletta and Grandpa were still alive, I'd save them before begging for their forgiveness. That was when I heard the snapping of a twig followed by a ragged hiss to my left. Turning to look, I saw a black worm about 4 feet long with a crimson stripe pattern going down its back. Its head consisted of a circular mouth with concentric rows of fangs while 4 large fang-like pincers clicked against each other. Looking at my sword in hand, I made up my mind. I'm not running this time. I'm killing this thing if it's the last thing I do. Holding the handle with both my hands, I charged the monster as it leapt at me. I barely managed to dodge in time as one of its pincers clipped the bicep of my right arm. I looked at my arm to see that I had been given a tiny cut, yet the wound was profusely bleeding. Did this worm make injuries bleed more than they should? There wasn't any further time to contemplate this as the worm, more like leech, was already beginning to slither my way. I couldn't afford to be cut by that thing if it could make me bleed out. Then, it leapt at me once more. As I dove aside, I wasn't expecting for the leech to hit the tree behind me and then spring off of it to where I was prone on the ground. My eyes widened as I was quickly forced to roll to the side as it slammed face first into where I had once been. Pushing myself back to my feet as the leech began to recover from its impact, I roared as I swung my sword-like and axe at the monster's head. My first hit dug into its flesh, causing the leech to wriggle its worm-like body as it screeched in pain. I pulled my sword out and swung it again, missing the first wound I gave it and biting just as far into its flesh in the next spot I hit. More inhuman hisses and screeching said it was still alive. I glared before continuing to hack at it. My vision was just red at this point as I just wanted this monster dead. Fuck you. Die. Die. I screamed with each hit. You thought you could eat me? Eat shit, I shouted, continuing to stab it over and over, yet it kept squirming. Just die already. You ugly piece of shit. I punctuated each word with a stab until it had finally stopped moving. As the rush I felt left me, I let go of my sword and fell to my knees. I looked at the mangled mess that my sword remained stabbed into. I killed my first monster and I couldn't even feel proud of it. All I felt was angry and sad. I had no one I could tell about this. My friends wouldn't cheer me on, I wouldn't be able to regale Aletta about the fight, Mom and Grandpa wouldn't tell me how proud they were that I won. It was just me, a sword, and a monster's corpse alone in the woods. Looking at my right arm, I saw that it was still bleeding. I needed to take care of that now. Taking my sword out of the leech, I used it to cut part of my trouser's left leg off and sliced through it a bit more until I made some simple bandages. Then, I looked around until my eyes landed on exactly the thing I was looking for. Moving over to the moss on the ground, I pulled it away from the tree it was attached to. The moss was a light green with specks of yellow mixed in. From what Grandpa had told me, this was called gold dust moss, named after the yellow sprinkled throughout it. It was highly useful for helping injuries due to the way it could absorb blood and keep injuries from getting infected. Putting the moss against my wound, I then wrapped the makeshift bandages against it to hold it in place. Finishing this, I examined my arm and could tell that my bandages seemed to stem the bleeding. Hopefully, whatever venom that leech had used would run its course before I fully bled out. Following this, I continued traveling until I thankfully found a small spring. Quickly rushing to it, I immediately went to my knees and started scooping water into my mouth, which I greedily drank. It was after I had my fill that I fell back into a sitting position and just took a moment to rest. I barely killed my first monster, let alone those demons that Grandpa had fought against. This was barely anything. If I'm going to kill all those demons, I needed to get better. I had to be able to chop off heads and limbs with one swing. I needed to be able to dodge every hit. I had to become the best. Looking up to the sky, I found that the daylight was slowly fading. I needed to find a good place to sleep. That night, I took shelter in one of the trees by the spring. Then, I went to sleep. I dreamt of that hill once again, covered in silver grass. This time, I found myself able to walk towards it. As I did so, I noticed a figure sitting on top of it. Yet, as I continued to climb, I found the effort to be harder and harder. If I could just reach a little further to the top. I was almost there. Waking up once again with that strange dream stuck in my mind, I began eating from my ration of maple breeze before climbing down from the tree and heading over to the spring which I drank from once again. Sating my thirst, I continued my journey west. As I did so, I couldn't help but feel like something was watching me. Yet, trying to look around didn't reveal any hidden threats. That just continued to put me on edge as I held my blade out, wondering where whatever it is would come out to strike me. But nothing did. That day, I didn't encounter any monsters. It almost felt like they were avoiding me, but that didn't exactly make sense. It wasn't until the afternoon that I heard the howling of wargs once again. They found me. Rushing to a tree, I began clambering up it until I accidentally grabbed a weak branch which snapped in my hand. "No!" I shouted as I fell back to the earth with a thud on my back. The sharp shooting pain that erupted from my back ended up stunning me for a few moments until I got a hold of myself. The wargs were almost here. Pushing myself up onto my feet, I realized that my fall had broken a lot of the branches I used as handholds. I wasn't going to be able to climb in time. I had to fight. If I was going to die to some fucking monsters, then I would go down swinging. Quickly readying my sword in front of myself, I watched as 3 wargs bounded out. They all growled as 2 of the wargs padded around to my sides to fully surround me. "Fuck you!" I screamed and charged towards the warg in front of me. My peripheral vision picked out the wargs on my side charging me as the middle warg met my challenge with hackles raised before pouncing. I was a dead man going down swinging until 3 snake-like grey limbs stretched out from behind me before wrapping around the necks of each warg, stopping each in their tracks with whines of pain. The wargs didn't get long to figure out what happened before the necks of all 3 snapped, killing them instantly. The 3 snake-like limbs released each warg after this, letting them fall to the ground, and I took a moment to get a better view of the limbs in that moment. They looked to be covered in grey fur. Then, the tails pulled back from behind me and I turned around and found myself staring at a massive fox with grey fur, intelligent green slitted eyes, and 7 tails swaying behind it. I quickly backed away from the creature and held my sword out to it, yet the thing didn't even respond, it just curiously looked at my sword like it was some toy. The fox cocked its head curiously at me before doing something I didn't expect. It padded away from me and into the tangle of trees and branches until I lost sight of it. What the hell was that thing? Animals can have disputes over territories and fight one another, but why did that large fox kill those 3 wargs but leave me alone? I probably would have been easy to take down considering how it put down those wargs with only 3 of its 7 tails. It also didn't even bother eating the bodies. The wargs were a free meal, but the fox passed up on it. I don't have any idea about this. Lowering my sword, I cautiously began walking away, hoping that the fox wasn't just going to change its mind and decide to eat me. At the very least, I had managed to survive this encounter mostly unscathed. I could already imagine telling a letter all about meeting some giant fox with multiple tails that. Then I remembered that she was gone. I increased my pace, if only so I could focus on moving instead of thinking. It had been 4 days, yet my chest still seized up thinking about it. I wanted to scream, to cry, to let everything out that was bottled inside me. But I couldn't. I had to keep moving through this forest. The monsters here wouldn't care about a sad human boy. All they'd see is lunch. Continuing my journey, I couldn't tell how many miles I had walked at this point. Distance just seemed to blur in this place due to the trees obscuring everything in the distance. My only real method of determining how far I had traveled was by how sore my legs felt by the end of the day. What was I even doing at this point? I didn't even know if there was an end goal to this journey west. I only kept going at this point due to a voice telling me to do so and my willpower making me go on. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't stop at this point. I just had to keep moving forwards. Rest. You're tired. Perhaps that voice was the small part of my mind trying to keep me sane, even if the event of hearing voices that aren't there is completely insane. It was a funny paradox. Yet, maybe that sane part of me is correct. I was just tired of it all. I had rage and hate burning in me that had nothing to hurt or scream at. I hadn't encountered any monsters besides those wargs today, and that meant I had nothing to let my emotions out on. It was mentally draining. So, I decided to take up that advice from the sane part of my mind and call it quits early. Finding a good enough tree, I climbed up its branches before finding a good spot to rest against. As I started trying to get into a comfortable position, my face felt itchy, so I scratched it until I felt exactly why it was so itchy. My face was still caked in Mom's blood where she last held me. My chest felt tight, but I held it in and tried to let myself drift off to sleep. My eyes opened to that silver hill again. This time, I sprinted up it. I wanted to know why I was seeing this place when I slept. I needed to know who that figure at the top of it was. I wanted an answer to at least one thing in my life, because all I've gotten since my village was attacked is one unanswered question after another unanswered question. It frustrated and pissed me off, and this time, in this dream, I was going to make it to the top of that damn hill. Within a few agonizing moments, I finally arrived, breathing heavily from the exertion and from how I felt. Yet, when I made it to the top, I found myself looking at a woman with glowing white hair sitting on the grass. The first thing I took note of was how inhumanly beautiful she looked. Then there were her silver eyes with unnatural slitted pupils that looked at me warmly, matching the smile on her face. Her clothing looked odd, like a white robe held together with cloth in the middle. Yet, that didn't exactly look as odd as the pair of long, white fox ears twitching on her head or the 10 white furred tails that waved behind her. Hello, Nero. It seems like you've had a long journey. Would you like to have a seat and rest your legs? I promise, the ground is very comfortable, she said kindly while patting the grass in front of her. I couldn't help but feel that her voice was familiar. Then it came to me, you're the voice I've been hearing, I stated as I came closer to her. Then I grew angry. Why have I been hearing you in my head? Who are you? What is it you want from me? The woman didn't seem to take any offense from the shouting, she just continued giving me that warm smile. You called out for help, and you were lonely. The woman answered, which told me absolutely nothing. What the hell does that mean? I screamed. Why wouldn't she just react? Get upset? Get angry? She kept giving me that infuriatingly warm smile. You prayed. I answered. That made my eyes widen before they quickly narrowed. You're a goddess? She nodded in reply. Then, where the fuck were you? Where were you when Mom died? When my home was destroyed? When I lost Grandpa and a letter? I'm sorry that I couldn't help you earlier. She apologized calmly, making my fists shake. You're sorry. Sorry isn't going to bring Mom back. Sorry won't help Grandpa and a letter, if they're even still alive. I'm sure the ashes of my village are real appreciative of your apologies. I found myself pacing as I shouted this. When I finally was managed to stop walking and focus back on this woman, I found her in front of me. Then, she pulled me into a hug that I couldn't escape. I tried hitting her, kicking her, screaming every curse and obscenity I could think of, then even more vile words that I just started making up, yet she just kept holding me. When words didn't work, I just resorted to primal screaming, yet she still didn't let go. "It's all right. Just let it out. I'm right here," she said in a soft voice that was somehow audible over my screaming. And somewhere in that moment, the dam just broke inside me. I want my home back. I want Grandpa and a letter back. I want my mom. I'm a coward that left my family behind. And that's when I started wailing into her shoulder. I cried until my throat hurt, then I kept going. My eyes ran out of tears, but they still burned like more should come out. And all the while, this woman kept saying soothing words into my ear as she continued to hold me. My cries died down after a while, and sometime during all of this, I found myself holding onto this woman like a lifeline. "Why weren't you there?" I asked with a warbling voice. "I'm still new to these lands. Belief in me isn't strong enough for me to affect much beyond a few areas. You got close enough to one of these areas that I was able to latch onto your prayers. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you then, but that just means I have to try all the harder to be here for you now." I didn't question her at this point. I just wanted to have someone there who cared. After what felt like hours, or it might have been minutes, she spoke to me again. "Would you like to tell me what happened?" I pulled my head from her shoulder and sniffed my nose before slowly nodding. From there, she gently made us both sit on the ground. From there, she didn't rush or prod me to speak, she just waited for when I wanted to talk. After readying myself, I finally answered her. I woke up after our harvest celebration to Mom and a letter screaming. Going downstairs. I felt my eyes squeezed tight at the memory, but I continued. Mom had been cut open. I didn't have time to say goodbye. She died in my arms. "Do you want to stop?" the woman asked. I shook my head. I needed at least one other person to know about what happened. "Oh," a letter screamed outside. When I went to find her, it was hell. And that was when my anger took over at the thought of those monsters. Demons tore through my village, capturing, torturing, and butchering anyone they found. 2 of them stabbed a letter with their stingers. I think they were poisoned since she couldn't move, but she was still alive watching me, begging me to help. I was a coward who couldn't move as the demons stopped playing with her and focused on me. I was only saved when Grandpa ended up killing both of them at the cost of taking a stinger to his side. He gave me his sword and told me to run. Then, like a coward, I left Grandpa and a letter behind and ran. I felt the woman put a hand on my cheek before giving me a soft gaze. "Being afraid is natural. You are not a coward. Your grandfather knew that if you stayed trying to help them, then you'd suffer the same fate. He made a painful choice. Don't disrespect that choice by calling yourself a coward when you were told to run." But what am I supposed to do then? I can't help but feel like a coward after everything that happened. What can I do? I begged the woman for an answer to somehow assuage the guilt that I still felt. "You do what you can. The most I can do right now is die." I could barely fight an overgrown leech, much less an army of demons, I said with disappointment. It would take me years before I could possibly become strong enough to avenge my family. By then, those demons would likely already be gone. What if you had help? I found myself focusing on the woman's silver eyes when she said this. "What do you mean?" "I can help you. All you have to do is ask," she said while holding my hands together. But why? How? I have a myriad of reasons to care. You need help, and I have the ability to do so. It is my obligation as someone with power to help those in need. In addition, a great injustice has been done. It should be corrected. And the final 2 reasons are a little selfish on my part," she admitted with a giggle. "Why would your final reasons be selfish? From what I've seen, you've been nothing but kind and selfless." I asked with a bit of curiosity. "Well, to answer that, I have to answer the how I can help you from earlier. I'd like to make you my paladin." My eyes widened as I heard this. From all the stories I've heard, paladins were warriors chosen by specific patron gods to act as their emissaries to the world. Because of this, Paladins typically had immense strength coupled with divine magics that they could call down upon their enemies. And why would you want me to become your paladin? I'm just a son of farmers from the country. I am weak. I'm not worthy of anything. I admitted to the goddess. And I disagree. You have a strong will and a need to see justice be done. You might not think so, but I think you're worthy. I couldn't help but feel a little warm and bashful at hearing a goddess say she believes in me. Now, to answer your other question, I'd like you to become my paladin, not just for the other reasons I gave, but also so that you might spread belief of both myself and my daughter. That leads into my other selfish reason. I can be a little bit of a protective parent, and while she is powerful, I'd like it if there was another person out there who could protect my daughter. Your daughter? You mean to say that a goddess is actually walking around the world right now? That she is. She's a young demigoddess, still coming into her own, that is currently residing within the Re-Estais kingdom as an adamantite plate adventurer. She's been quite busy since arriving there and has already been making waves. Yet, I can't help but worry about her along with my grandbabies. Grandchildren? So, you mean to say that she shook her head with a laugh? No, she's adopted an adorable pair of sisters as her own. Honestly, I'd be impressed if she managed to become pregnant and then give birth to a child in the span of. She and her lover only sealed the deal about 3 days ago. The woman answered after thinking about it. Wait, does that mean that you spied on your daughter being intimate? I asked, wondering if this goddess might possibly be a voyeur. The goddess gave me a so-so with her hand. One of my domains as a goddess is fertility. It tends to come with the territory that I typically know certain things by default. Even if that wasn't the case, my servants keep me informed about my daughter. She answered, making it more reasonable than her just being a pervert. Aside from all of this, I don't even fully know who you or your daughter are. How could I even become your paladin when I don't even know your name? Then let me give you an introduction, Nero. My name is Inori, goddess of foxes, industry, agriculture, fertility, prosperity, and magic. My daughter's name is Cassia Blanc, fledgling goddess of magic. Would you become my paladin to spread my name and right injustices across the world? As she said this, while she still maintained that motherly presence from the start of our meeting, Inori now seemed larger in a sense, all-encompassing, yet still giving that kind and protective warmth. It was that protective warmth that made me wish that I had something like that when my village was attacked. And it is that very same warmth that made me believe that Inori, the only deity who had ever answered my prayers, might be able to change the world, with her daughter Cassia Blanc in tow. And with her help, I might be able to avenge my mother and possibly save Aletta and Grandpa. I'll do it. I'll become your paladin and spread your name to the world while righting injustices. I'll do what I can to prevent what happened to me and my home from happening to others, I said in oath to the goddess before me. Then I'll accept your oath wholeheartedly, Nero. And in turn, I'll gift you my power so that you may accomplish your oath to the fullest. Inori then took my right hand in both of her hands and I felt a warmth in my hand until Inori removed her hands from mine. When I looked, I saw a symbol on the back of my hand that consisted of 10 white tails spiraling towards a purple flame in the center. When you wake again, my paladin, your protector will be there to guide you to the end of your path west, Inori said kindly. Protector? You've already encountered him. He's been quite busy making sure that you have been safe. And then I thought about that large fox with the 7 tails that have protected me from the wargs. Are you talking about that grey fox I met earlier? Inori nodded, the very same. Yamato doesn't like to talk much, but he is very diligent in any duty assigned to him. He'll also be the one train you, so make sure to be a good student, she said with a teasing laugh. At the very least, I was going to be taught how to wield this new power I received. I'll do my best. I answered. I know you will, Nero. Now, it's time to wake up. When I opened my eyes, I found myself still in the tree that I decided to rest in last night with my sword resting against my body. Then, I looked down to the back of my right hand to see that the symbol Inori given me was still there. That proved it wasn't a dream last night. I had ended up speaking with and then becoming a paladin to a goddess. Taking a breath, I prepared myself for my coming future and then climbed down the tree. The moment my feet hit the ground, I heard something moving towards me. Turning around with my blade out, I found myself looking at the grey fox once again. "Why, Yamato, right?" I tentatively asked. The fox nodded before gesturing with his head towards the west. "You want us to start moving?" I received another nod. "Lead the way." Yamato began walking and I hurriedly followed after him while wondering what my future might hold. Demiurge. Arriving at the Baharuth research outpost, I saw that my demons and devils were well underway on the research materials we acquired with this outpost's annexation. I can already see that Lord Ines has probably predicted my actions for this outpost. Obviously, he'd want to eventually convert this outpost to a staging ground where our research would be converted to chimerism. We'd capture pockets of the local populace that were isolated from the bigger towns and cities of the Empire. From there, we'd convert them into chimeric beasts tamed under Nazaric's power. Then, Lord Ines would have us unleash these creatures upon the Empire as both a method to test their defenses while also acting as a way to demoralize the Baharuth's people. And, with our testing of curses on the materials here, we could possibly incorporate our curse understanding into our weaponized chimeras to utilize them to greater effect. Walking past a few of the moaning materials, I passed by a cell containing a set of materials that were related to one another. With them, we decided to test the effects of a continually rotting curse combined with a continually growing curse. The pair of them had constantly been growing tumorous growths throughout their bodies which were quickly rotted away, leaving the pair with ever-shifting forms. From what we've seen, the older material maintained much of its sanity and had been able to ignore the constant pain of its nerves growing and dying repeatedly, that or it's kept silent in some method to comfort the younger material. With the younger material, it has constantly kept screaming and hasn't shown any issue with the continual screams due to the constant regeneration of its vocal cords before they rot away. I wonder what might occur if we were to graft the two materials' bodies and nerves together. Would the younger material synchronize with the older and maintain its silence, or would the older follow the screams of the younger? We'll have to test it out. I wrote my orders onto the chart attached to the cell of the materials before moving along to the next. This one proved very interesting. We gave it a curse of the Berserker. Since we started that test hours ago, the material has spent the entire time punching its cell walls and floors non-stop. At this point, its fists had been broken apart into flesh and shards of bone. Now, it just punched everything with the jagged bones of its forearms. What might occur if we added a curse of growth to this one as well? That would be another idea to test, which I quickly added to its chart. Nina. Today, my team and I had made it pretty far through the dungeon. After the multiple attempts and failures so far, we've become highly aware of our surroundings for anything out of place. In addition, Dine has made sure to constantly build us plant paths to avoid triggering any pressure plate traps that we otherwise might not see. It's actually taken us pretty far, all things considered. We weren't getting our delving cut short as often to traps. Now, it was usually due to the undead we had started to encounter. They were getting stronger, faster, and worst of all, smarter. For instance, yesterday, we had one delving ended due to another one of those giant undead fighting in tandem with a horde of zombies. Dealing with the giant undead was difficult as is, but add a bunch of other normal undead to keep us occupied, and it felt almost impossible. We lost to that section of the dungeon 2 more times until we came up with a strategy that worked. Dine would build a wall of roots with his mace that would funnel into a narrow corridor which made the horde's numbers useless. From there, the giant undead would typically charge us and prevent the zombies from being able to fit into the narrow corridor unless they followed behind it. That would be when Lucrute would shoot its feet with his root arrows, pinning it to the floor. Originally, we tried to see if the root arrows would kill it in one go like they had to all the other undead. Unfortunately, that failed since it was able to continue fighting on even after looking like a pincushion. It was just too powerful, it seemed. But the fact that Lucrute's root arrows did explode out of it meant that there was a plan to be had. Rooting it to the floor was our second attempt. After it had been rooted to the floor, Lucrute and I would endlessly bombard it with arrows, root arrows, and foxfire. Dine and Peter would fight off any zombie that climbed over the wall to keep them off of us. What we hadn't prepared for was when a few stronger zombies that were hiding in the horde managed to smash through the walls and allow the rest of the horde to overrun us. That left our third attempt with us applying everything we had learned before into action. This time, Dine continually kept adding more and more roots to the wall in order to reinforce it, while Peter remained on guard duty and took up more of the burden of protecting us while Dine remained occupied. It felt like almost 20 minutes before we defeated this giant and cleaned up the rest of the undead. By the time we had finished, all of us felt like ending our delve for the day since we were exhausted and hungry. Today, after over an hour of work, we managed to fight our way back to this room and clear out the undead. Now, we just have to open the door up ahead to get to the next section of this torturous place. As we approached the door, Peter looked to us all and asked, "You guys ready for this?" "Better now than never, Pete," Lucrute replied with a grin. "Why would we stop here when we're getting so close?" I answered with a nod. "Guess the others are raring to go. Can't let you all have the fun without me," Dine answered as he pointed his mace at the door. Peter nodded with a laugh before facing the door once more. "Pop it open, Dine." "With pleasure," Dine responded before making the roots from his mace launch out and begin pushing the door open. As he did so, multiple darts began shooting out from different angles towards the spot a person would normally have opened the door at. All the darts managed to hit were the roots, which did nothing. With the door fully open, Dine recalled the roots back into his mace and smirked with amusement. "Seems that we're picking up on the traps to this place," he remarked. "Good thing, too. I doubt that any of us wanted to look like a porcupine right now," Lucrute said to the druid as he patted him on the shoulder. "At least we have one less thing to worry about," Peter said with relief. "Let's head on in." Dine smashed his mace into the ground and a pathway of roots grew out in front of us over the doorway's floor. Then, the four of us walked over it and entered into the newest room. Once we were all inside, the torches lining the stone columns of this room grew into pillars of blue flame, fully lighting the room up to reveal a trio of robed skeletons. We barely had time to study them when 3 balls of fire grew in their hands and were suddenly launched at us. "Take cover," Peter shouted as he blocked a ball of fire with his shield and covered me as the two of us went behind a column. Lucrute and Dine had done much the same, taking refuge behind a column on the opposite side of the room. "Ideas?" Dine shouted over to us. "Know how well a root wall might hold up?" Peter shouted back. "Let's find out," Dine answered before slamming his mace into the ground and growing a tangled mass of roots over to our pillar. Or, at least he tried to do so. What ended up occurring is that the ball of flame the skeletons shot at us started tearing through the roots until Dine ended the attempt. "Seems like that's a bust." I saw Lucrute try to take a peeking shot until another ball of fire flew past where his head had been. "Okay, these things are definitely watching us like hawks," the archer announced. "All right, since we can't even move to try and take aim, I think it's a good time to give one of my classic spells a go." Taking a moment, I conjured up a magic arrow and had it aim for one of the 3 skeletons I visualized in my mind. Then, I set it loose around the corner of the column and listened as 3 balls of fire were sent at the attack. Thinking I might have noticed something, I conjured up 2 more magic arrows and sent them after the 3 skeletons one after the other. 3 spells were conjured to take out the first arrow while it took another 2 seconds for them to react to the second arrow. These undead were fast, but they still had limits like any other caster. "Guys, there's a 2-second delay. Follow up," I shouted before casting 2 more arrows in obvious view of the others. They all took positions with Peter and Dine readying their shields for a charge while Lucrute knocked a root arrow into his bow. Then, I fired both arrows at the skeletal mages who immediately fired their spells off to collide with my spell. At the same time, Peter and Dine broke out from their places behind the columns and rushed the undead with their shields up. That would be what drew the attention of the undead after blocking my spells. And that meant that Lucrute and I had our chance. Casting a bolt of foxfire, I moved out from behind the column and aimed before firing my spell off. At the same time, Lucrute needed less than a second to move from his column and take aim before firing. Within 2 more seconds, the skeletons were about to fire their spells until a root arrow embedded itself into the center skeleton's skull while my foxfire struck the one on the left, immolating it. A moment later, roots shot out of the skeleton's skull and impaled the other 2 before pulling them into a tangled mass of roots, bones, and robes. That was all it took as we cheered at taking down another tough enemy together. Kasha. I couldn't help but smile in pride at both the teamwork my friends displayed but also the quick thinking of Nina. It had only been 4 days since I've had them challenge mine and Momo's dungeon, and they were already making great progress. While each of them has been growing stronger in leaps and bounds, they've also gotten much better at coordinating their on-the-fly tactics with one another in stressful situations. That can, at times, be more helpful than simply being individually strong. The best part about all this progress is that my team has made it halfway through this floor of the dungeon. Sadly, for them, the dungeon was only going to get more difficult from here on out. What's the score for us up to at this point? Momo asked next to me. Both he and Nabi had decided to stop by today to watch the progress. 13, me, 15, you. I answered. It appears that your traps are running out of steam, Momo teased. They haven't finished clearing this floor just yet. Besides, they still have 2 more floors to go after this. I retorted with a raised brow. Fair enough, I suppose, Furball. I looked at Momo with a dropped jaw before I grinned and patted him on the arm. I see that you are learning, Napoleon Bonaparte. I quickly remarked back to the skeleton. I'm like a parent watching their child ride a bike for the first time. I'm so proud, I teased while wiping a non-existent tear from my eye. And I'd be terrified for any child that you ended up raising. You sure you wouldn't have them ride that bike into a dungeon for their first outing? Momo retorted. What? I'm supervising, I said in mocking offense while gesturing wildly to the scrying spell of my teammates. Of course you are. Momo answered dryly, before we both ended up chuckling. By the way, how's the monster mash treating you? Momo shrugged, they've seemed pretty busy. I couldn't exactly say why since I've only asked a few to perform recon, mainly in the Baharuth Empire. Perhaps they just like performing tasks to keep themselves occupied. Well, you and your friends were the ones that created them. Maybe you just put it into their creation, that or they just like to do things. Leaning over to look at Nabi, I quickly asked, Nabi, besides just helping out Momo here, do you have any hobbies you like to do for fun? There was quite surprised to have been brought into the conversation. Lady Kasha, my duty is to serve both Nazarick and Lord Ines. She answered, making me feel a little depressed for her. Come on, Nabi, there's gotta be something that you like to do that isn't work-related. Like painting, reading, sculpting, collecting, anything at all. She shook her head at all my suggestions. There's more to life than just work. Nabrul, Momo began as he looked to the woman, why not try to find something you might enjoy for a pastime when not performing your duties? I think that Kasha makes a good point. It's a hope of mine that everyone in Nazarick manages to find something like a recreational hobby that they might enjoy. Nabrul looked down for a moment as her eyes flitted back and forth in thought, then she looked up to us and answered, I think that I could try taking up painting, Lord Ines. I actually felt pretty happy for the NPC since it probably wasn't easy to try and think of something for herself when she was probably programmed with only the need to serve the guild. That's excellent to hear, Nabrul, Momo said with a pleased tone. Thank you, Lord Ines. Nabi returned with a bow of her head. I would take it that most of your other followers probably don't have much thought about their own hobbies or interests unless they relate to your or your guild, like Nabi over here. I remarked aloud. Momo thought about it for a few moments before nodding in agreement. I do believe that to be the case. From what I have witnessed, most of my subordinates within Nazarick view anything that isn't related to helping me or the guild as a waste of time. I'm hoping that, in time, it might eventually change and they might grow beyond what their creators originally made them as. I'm all for personal growth, I answered before adding a little cautiously, but I think it would be a good idea to make sure that your people's hobbies don't veer towards the morally horrific like your guild designed them as. I doubt that this world could handle such a thing, and that is worrying to say the least. My subordinates have kept to my orders pretty well. I haven't heard of many reports from them actually having violent encounters with the local populace, which is a good thing, at least. Momo answered. Then, he pondered for a moment before adding, unfortunately, Demiurge was unable to locate the ones who mind-controlled Shultir. He said that the trail ran cold on one of the main roads used in the kingdom. Most likely, the person or persons probably blended in with some group to sneak away undetected. Shit, then that means that we've still got some lunatic with a world item, that we don't know which one, on the loose. We have no clue as to what their motives may be, and we also are unaware of if they might be related to a player or not. Leaning back in my chair, I sighed before looking over to the armored skeleton. I'm really starting to hate this mystery. You and me both, Momo said with a dour tone before we focused back on my team taking on a group of skeletal mages mixed with zombies. As we watched my team continue fighting, a random thought came to my mind. Then, I decided to ask, hey, Momo. Yes, Kasha? I can't help but wonder about one thing that I haven't tried since coming to this world. It used to be all the rage back home years ago when the world we lived in wasn't a polluted hellhole. And what might that be? You are being a little vague about it. Momo answered, causing me to laugh before looking over to him. Have you ever tried fishing? Fishing? Momo asked incredulously. Yes, fishing. You know, have a stick with a line attached that has a hook and bait on the end. Then, throw it in the water and watch some fish try to bite. I returned back to the confused Lich. No, I've never tried fishing. There was no urge to do so since I got here, and I never thought of it on Earth either. Momo answered honestly. I gave him a large grin before saying, it's never too late to try. So, I think that since neither of us have ever gone fishing before, then we're going to head off to a nearby lake tomorrow and spend our day taking it easy and learning how to do this. This idea is a little odd, even for you, Momo said before considering my idea. Then, he said with some apprehension, but why not? I think that I can take one day away from Nazarick and let Albedo and Demiurge run things in my place. Awesome. Guess I'll just have to give my team the good news. They get the day off where I don't run them ragged to the bone, I said with quite a bit of excitement. One thing that I haven't really done since coming here is try all of the things that a polluted hellscape of Earth wouldn't allow. And now, with practically all the time in the world, I'd like to try some interesting things. I'm sure that they'll be appreciative of that, Momo said good-naturedly. That was when I caught my team falling for another trap, this time one of mine. I'm up 1, Momo. Scores 14-15, I said before teleporting to retrieve my team once again.